It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
Hey, my friends, thanks for joining me on The Sam Lesante Show. So, folks, what is a fiction writer? You know, a fiction writer. There's a lot of writers, but what does a fiction writer do? Well, I perused a number of these three books written by Jeff Davis, who is a fiction writer. We're going to talk about what a fiction writer does. But, folks, it's very interesting when you read these books and what you get out of a book. And my guest, of course, is the author himself, Jeff Davis. Jeff, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, writers always fascinate me because of the creativity that, you know, each writer has, okay? Mm-hmm. How you can take yourself from the existing environment and society and then start writing, you know, a novel or a book. And the three books which we'll discuss was interesting. So tell me a little bit about yourself. How did this whole thing start with you?
I actually always had an interest in writing. I grew up in Jim Thorpe. I think I had an interest, but when I was younger, I wasn't really so serious about it. I was in some local bands. I did some bartending. I did a little bit of everything. And later in life, I just decided that I was going to write a book. And I had started several at that time, but not finished them. But then, as I got older, as I put the drums away, as time went on, I got more into the writing aspect and had a daily routine, and then finished my first book.
Okay, so now, in the involvement of a person who begins to write a book and a novel, okay, that things happen in your life, you know, because as we discussed briefly the three books that you have here, the things happen in your life that you decided, well, let me take this particular thing and then evolve it into a story, okay, and then concentrate it, because, you know, you follow through, you know, a whole process here, okay, and so how did that happen?
I think things do happen in your life, but also there's instances that happen in your life. When I look at books, I see two forms of things. I see the good person and I see the not so good person. I can go back, something I remember when I was a kid, in the middle of the night, my father used to have nightmares. He was in the Second World War. He actually, he was in the 4th Armored Division, and he was in, with the Americans when they raided the first Nazi concentration camp. And out of all the places he'd been, I asked him one time, what was the worst? And he would always say about going into that concentration camp, seeing the charred bodies, this and that. And I think he would always tell about this one guy that would come up skin and bones, and they tried to give him food, whatever they could, because they felt so bad for him. So I think a lot of my characters are those people who are the underdogs in life, pulling themselves up. The other form of character, the bad one, sometimes comes from when I was about 18. I was with a friend in an alley, and we were going down the alley, and there was a guy standing there, and you kind of had this dim light shining on him, this silhouette of this person, and he had a knife, and he actually stabbed my friend. Now, fortunately, my friend came out okay, but what I always remembered best about him was the eyes. He had these oil black eyes that you just want to remember something like that in case you ever run across a person like that. And I think even in the book in Crude, where I have the villain, that's where that person actually materialized from. Nesting with the Loons was an entirely different kind of book.
This was your first book.
Right.
All right, before we get to this, okay, you had mentioned about, I said to you, well, when my show is done, okay, what would you like the viewers to get from the show, okay? Because there are a lot of people who like to read fiction books, and then, you know, then there's nonfiction, of course. I'm a big fan of O'Reilly. I have all his books.
Mm-hmm.
I think his writing is fantastic because it's entertaining when you're writing, and it's all factual. Okay.
Right.
Now, so what is the fiction writer? What's the difference between the nonfiction reader and the fiction reader? What are you looking to do?
I think the nonfiction reader is more looking for a factual-based person, something that happens in real life. I'm actually working on a nonfiction book also, but that's a different story. The fiction writer or the fiction reader, they want to expand their imagination. You don't want, I think your first rule, one of the first rules in fiction is maybe you want to entertain the person, but you also want them to get something out of that.
Yes.
Where they're putting themselves in life situations at a safe distance, but at the same time, they can kind of read that book and fall into the pages, identify with that character, and kind of become that character and say, what would I do in this situation if this happened to me? So that's what I try to do in all of those books. Now, in The Seventh Jackal, there's a lot of kids involved. So as I was writing that book, I was thinking of my own childhood and the kids I would go with. And I thought, you see books for kids all the time. Books about kids are written for kids. So I said, well, why not a book about kids written for adults that kind of takes the adult into their past and a look at their childhood and what they would see.
Okay, so when the very first book you read, okay, you have here Nesting with the Loons. Okay, it's a satire.
Right.
It's about an everyday office person drinking coffee and eating cheese sandwiches for lunch, surrounded by the madness of a bureaucratic world. Paradise for him comes in the form of an elusive brunette love interest and escaping the craziness of less than the sane world. Okay? And now one of your readers, you said here, described it this way. It's a breakdown, ride down a steep South African jungle road in the backseat of a 1940s Jeep with no windshield and a blindfold on. You know you're going to die, but the ride is so freaking amazing, okay? Now, when you put this book together, you had to have a vision from start to finish as to, how were you going to make this every day? How did this, story evolve?
That story evolved through, actually, I hate to say this, a lot of people I had worked with over the past, and this kind of reversed logic that we're living in this society where the sane people are really becoming the outlanders in life. And it's just a reverse logic of watching people at work. For instance, one of the people I work with once said to me, his friend over here was doing nothing all day, and he's getting raises and everything like that. And he said, I'm doing all the work and I'm not getting a raise. Actually, I'm getting a demotion. And I said, well, that's because this person who's doing nothing isn't making any mistakes, so he's going to get promoted. But you're working so you can make mistakes, so you're going to get less. So the whole thing evolves around this. It's very politically incorrect and evolves around this kind of insane atmosphere. And it's this guy who he basically just had it. He's trying to escape the routine world. I mean, he gets up in the morning at 6 a.m., he has his coffee, the kids spilled their cereal all over the table, it's bumper-to-bumper traffic, and he's just had it, and he's going down the expressway, and he just takes a detour to the Philadelphia International Airport. That's not what happens in the book, but that's his mindset, where he just wants to escape the real life.
So in writing this book, excuse me, there are people in your life that inspired you to become creative to write this fiction book, right? Is there any nonfiction in here? Any hint of like it could be a real person story?
Yes. People ask me all the time. In fact, there is. I don't want to name names, but
No.
People ask me all the time, is this me? Is this my character?
Yes,
is this me?
Yeah.
And somebody, in fact, I have a new book coming out in summer called Jonahs Blackheart, and one of the readers loved it so much she wanted me to use her name, and I said, that's fine, but I have to kill you in this story. But yeah, people all the time. In fact, that's what writers kind of do. Somebody described it once, a fiction writer as a secret agent, because you're really in the background watching other people, what they do. Because later on you're going to write that down because you want to keep that a real scenario for those people.
So when you start writing the very first book, you had an idea of what you wanted to say, and you mentioned this, it's a satire about this particular person. So this person, you had an idea, okay, and then when you begin to write, right, is it something where as you're writing, your creative juices are becoming more evolved and you know, you just keep on writing, or it could say, all right, 4 o'clock, I'm done. I'm going to go out and have my supper, etc. Then tomorrow I'll start up again.
The way I do it with a book, and with all 3 books actually, is I'll kind of know the ending. And I'll sit down and I'll start writing it. And a lot of times it's just kind of, there's nothing there, but as you sit there and write, more and more comes to you, and you keep going. There's no set cutoff time, no set, I just happen to do it basically every night for a couple hours. If I want to take a break, I take a break. And it just goes like that. But a story rarely turns out in the end how you plan on it, because it's like going down a road with all these little side roads, and you take a detour and usually end up someplace else than you originally planned.
Is this the type of book? I mean, I know the answer, but I want to ask you. Is this the type of book I know when I start reading, you know, the O'Reilly books, Killing with the Rising Sun and Killing Reagan and all those other books? The reason I find them fascinating is because he brings you right into the situation and you can see the whole picture, okay? Is this the kind of book, Jeff, where, you know, you start reading and say, time just flies? I mean, you just don't want to, you just want to continue to read it, you know, until you get tired and fall asleep?
That's what I'm told. That's what I'm told. It's, again, it's more on the level of a Carl Hiaasen book. There's a lot of craziness in it and a lot of off-the-wall stuff, but a lot of things you can relate to as you go through.
Folks, I'm talking to Jeff Davis. Wrote 3 books so far. Nesting with the Loons. You get this on Amazon.com. And The Crude, which we'll talk about, and The Seven Jackal. What makes these people write? What do we get out of reading books? Are they good things? Are they bad things? Do we become creative? Do we become depressed? Do we become happy? We come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jeff. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. Remember, 24/7, you can watch all of our shows, all the shows we produce, from the girls all around the towns, Modern Medicine, Eye Care Today, you know, Skin Sense, the Sam Lesante Show, our SSP TV News, etc. A whole mess of shows that we have on SSPTV.com 24/7, and of course on Service Electric, and we're on channel 13 and also our HD channel 513. Comcast 190 in Pottsville on every day, excuse me, and then of course Wilkes-Barre, we're on Saturdays and Sunday evenings on channel 92. In the Lackawanna County, Scranton area, we're on Comcast 190 Saturday and Sunday mornings. My guest today is Jeff Davis, the author of Nesting with the Loons. These are our fiction books. Crude and The Seven Jackal. We're talking, Jeff, about how you what you thought about when you wrote this book. Okay, how long after writing this book did you decide to write Crude?
Well, after I wrote the first book, I decided I actually wanted to write a short story. And one night during the winter, the power went out, and you know, you put the candles on, you got the candles sitting on the kitchen table or whatever, and you got the blanket around if it's winter. And I'm sitting there waiting for the power to come on, and I'm thinking, well, what if it never does come back on? And I think that's really where the book started. I started writing some notes on, because I don't always know that people understand exactly what would happen if suddenly all your power was gone. There'd be no cars, there'd be no food trucked in, 50,000 planes a day would stop. Everything would basically stop. And Crude was about this everyday guy named Eddie Slate who got caught up in that scenario, and he's waiting for help to arrive. The only thing he has is a ham radio, and someone starts broadcasting it over it, and that in turn is your bad guy, more or less, who in a sense is kind of the human form of a jackal, and that's how I see these people. And that starts an interaction back and forth. There's lots of surprises in there. Actually, in the books, I use real life places from Jim Thorpe. As a matter of fact, one place down on Broadway, I don't know if you've ever been there, Soundcheck Records. It's a little record shop. I like to call it the last great independent record shop in America. I have a tendency to destroy that place in every single book I have. A friend of mine runs it, so, and he, I kind of kill him every time, but he always comes back, so he's good with that.
You mean you kill him in the book?
I kill him in the book, and then he comes back again in the next book, and
Now,
dies
different names, of course, right?
I actually use the same name of the place every time. I like to,
yeah.
but I use a number of places in Jim Thorpe in both of those books because I feel people can identify with real places where things happen.
In the Crude, excuse me. You're looking at here, okay, it's a thriller, which you said, brings a tense reality as to what might happen if suddenly the world's fuel supply stops, no gas, no heat, law enforcement all but gone, no food supply, despots roaming the streets in a struggle to maintain a sense of moral values in a world suddenly thrust into the dark ages. This asks the reader, what would you do? Okay, so now this is where the creative imagination comes in. What would we do? You know, and then you take us through this, right, as to what this person.
The book takes you through what that person would do. He needs food because there isn't really food. There's not really law enforcement. Suddenly you are just in this world that you've never known before. There is no getting up and watching TV and having coffee. There's kind of boarding your windows up because now there's no law enforcement and you have to worry about the bad element out there coming in and killing you, actually. So he, as in most stories, there's a love interest in this story. And he is using a girl as a ploy to get this person to come out to give him all his food and everything. And he just has a personal vengeance. As the book goes on, he has a personal vengeance against Eddie Slate in this book. And it goes back and forth. And it actually, I think I started to say, it started out to be a short story. You know, a kiss on the cheek, not a full-grown love affair. But as I went through chapter after chapter, it just kept rolling along. And that particular book is filled with surprises. I wanted to make every book you have a couple of surprises, but I wanted to make one after another in there that the reader could say, oh, look at this.
Okay, so there was, as I'm reading the book and I'm getting a sense, so what happens is you have a logical look at what the person, and then all of a sudden it's bang, something happens that you didn't even expect.
Right.
Okay, so it's one of those kind of books.
Right.
Okay, which is, you know, it's like, wow, you know, if you're watching a mystery movie, you know, they have all these different twists, and my wife and I like to watch a lot of mystery movies, and I'll say, Debbie, I think it's this, and she'll say, nah, and then turns out to be someone that you would never imagine because of the different twist. And I think this is what you do in your books.
Right. One of my readers had stopped me about a week ago, and I said, she read all three books, but out of the two thrillers, what do you like? And she said, I liked them both, but Crude was a little merciless.
Is that
I
right?
said, that's right, it was a little merciless. But it was deserving in the end.
Yeah.
So.
But here again, you know, in the mindset that you have as an author, okay, in writing, you have to pull these ideas for something you know, like you said, fiction reader is, you know, expands the imagination. You yourself have to expand your imagination to put this into writing.
You do, and I sometimes think that's the advantage for writers coming from a small town. In the city you have the clutter, but in a small town you have lots of room to dream about things. So you expand your imagination, but you have to have a real interest in people at a level, at an emotional level, where you can sit back and kind of detach yourself, but look at that person.
So if I was to ask you and say, so if I would say, meet someone and say, so what kind of person is Jeff Davis? You know, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you married? Do you have children? You know, how would you want someone to describe you as a person?
That's a good question, and I don't have a real answer to that, to tell you the truth. I'm just an everyday person.
Are you sociable?
Okay. I'm sociable.
I mean, do you go out a lot? Do you talk to people? Are you an introvert? I mean, you know, because this gives you the character of you know, the person, the author.
When I see something interesting, then I'll go after it with people. People generally interest me, or they don't.
Are you married?
Times. I'm not married.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not married.
Right. So, in other words, here again, not that I want to know your personal life, but the point is that when you look at, when I read O'Reilly's books, The Killing of Reagan,
Right.
it's you could see O'Reilly there. It's him and there's other, I forget, Dugard, okay? But you could relate the personality, okay, because he's on TV, all right? So you're not on TV, except now, but the point is, when you begin to see the character of the person, you know, then say, okay, you know, you get into the mindset. I guess what I'm trying to do, explore how, you know, because the books are great, okay? And so you have to have some kind of you have to be some kind of originality, has to start somewhere, okay?
It really starts with people, and I think a lot of times you envision in the characters somebody you know. And as you're going through that story, as I'm looking at Eddie Slate in Crude, in that cellar, I'm picturing actually somebody I know, and I'm thinking, what would they do in this situation?
So you are using real people.
I am using real people in a sense,
Right.
yes.
Folks, I'm talking to Jeff Davis. He is an author of 3 books. It's called Nesting with the Loons, Crude, and The Seventh Jackal. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back. You can get this at Barnes & Noble also, folks, Amazon.com. If you like reading, you know, they're fascinating books. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show. My guest is Jeff Davis, the author of 3 books, Crude, Nesting with the Loons, and The Jackal. Let me just give you, we have about 2 minutes left. The Seventh Jackal, all the books are fast. The Seventh Jackal. Like Crude, it's a tense and often moving. After a brutal murder and boy vanishes, a group of teenagers, led by a clairvoyant, elect to go out and find their missing friend and face off against an unstoppable adversary. Readers often comment on the kids in this novel, okay? They see themselves in the characters and situations they face, okay? I'd like to think of it as listening to an old song that comes on the radio. Suddenly, years later, you are there again. So this book must be a real fascinating book.
That book is a fascinating book. People seem to particularly enjoy that, and I always think it's mainly because of the kids.
Yeah.
And the kids certainly are reflected in all my
So
friends.
was this based on some real life experiences that you've seen?
In a way it is. A lot of that book, when the kids go out, one of their friends goes missing. There's a murder in a town. And his friends elect to go out and try to find him because the main character, Keenan Braddock, he is a clairvoyant and he's having visions of a killer. So they believe he's in trouble. So they go up in Jim Thorpe, if you're ever in Jim Thorpe, Mount Pisgah, and we used to climb around there continuously. So to me, when I'm writing those scenes where they're out in the woods and kids see things different.
Yes.
We see stripping holes, they see ancient armies
Yeah,
fighting, and
right.
something like you'd see out of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And for the kids' part, they are very real. Kind of my friends. My friends could identify, and so could other people.
Jeff, it was interesting talking with you. Jeff Davis, the author of 3 books, folks. You get them at Amazon.com or at Barnes & Noble. Nesting with the Loons, The Seven Jackal, and Crude. Fabulous reading, folks. Fabulous reading. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time.